G'day, ZiggyD here, and welcome back for some more Grim Dawn. As you can see, my soldier has just reached level 20 and is looking kind of badass, to be honest. Some of the skills are starting to really come into their own, and I'm starting to get some pretty cool gear. As such, I thought I'd give you guys a bit of a rundown on the soldier class, or mastery, and just explain some of the different skills, talk a bit about the build that I've been using and my experiences with the class so far, just so you guys can have a general idea of how everything works. So in general, the soldier is your weapons and armor specialist. They are very proficient with both melee and ranged weapons, though most skills seem to lean towards melee more. They have a lot of extra bonuses towards the defensive side of things, but can also deal a pretty balanced amount of damage. As such, cunning and physique are their main attributes, though spirit can be handy if you want to go for a more ability-heavy soldier. Out of all of the classes, they have the most passives by far, and they also have a lot of party benefiting auras and things like that, so that makes them the natural leader. So I'll just jump straight in to start talking about each individual skill, and we'll start off with the basic two starting skills. So when you reach level 1, you have access to cadence and force wave. Now cadence is a replacement for your normal left click attack. It doesn't cost any energy whatsoever, and it increases your weapon damage by quite a bit. And on top of that, it also adds a flat amount of physical damage. Now you guys can pause the video at any time if you want to read the description for these skills, because I might go a little bit too quickly. Basically, the way cadence works is the first two attacks don't deal any extra damage, but then the third attack is a cadence strike, and it deals all of this extra damage here. As you can see, it has 2 charged levels. I can actually go, and just for this skill maybe, I'll show you guys how it works if I can actually get to an enemy that I can attack. Yeah, that's not going to happen, so you guys will just have to trust me on this one. I'll just stick with the explanations. Now cadence, as you move through the skill tree and level up, so at level 15 here, at 15 skill points sunk into the soldier, and at 40 skill points sunk into the soldier passives, because you have to sink these points into this passive tree before you can start unlocking the skills. It gets 2 other supplementary passive skills that affect cadence alone. So the first one is fighting form, which adds a 2 target bleed. Now this bleed isn't a huge amount, but as you level it up, it can end up being a fair bit. And if you are focusing on stacking a lot of bleed gear and percentage bleed increases, then that could be quite powerful, I think. The one closer towards the end of the game is Deadly Momentum, which has a 33%, so a 1/3 chance of applying either 75 extra physical damage, 100 extra bleeding damage with improved duration, or a 9% reduction to the enemy's health. So all of those are pretty good, especially if you're speccing into bleed and you get that bleed hit, that's going to do a lot of extra damage over time, and if you get that extra physical damage strike, that's going to do a lot of damage too. So now we'll go over to Force Wave. Force Wave is a more utility skill, at least in my eyes. I think it has the potential to be used as a main skill because it does scale off weapon damage. As you can see there, at level 1, 15% weapon damage on top of the 10 to 25 physical damage it does there. So the better weapon you get, the more damage Force Wave is going to do. So it can scale, and I think it can be a main skill if you want it to be. However, I think it's best suited towards being a supplementary skill. Its main thing is that it stuns targets, so 1.5 to 2 second stun guaranteed at level 1 on all but bosses pretty much. Most enemies can be stunned. Some enemies will have stun resistance and things like that, but for the most part you can stun a group of enemies. And I'll actually show the way this works. It's kind of like a piercing projectile that shoots out in a direction like that. So going back to the skill, there are passives again at 15 points and at 32 points here. The first one is reduced armor and extra physical damage. 5 reduced armor doesn't seem like a lot, but that can add up quite quickly when you start sinking a fair few points into this. And the extra physical damage is only really helpful if you're speccing into this as a main skill, like a damage dealing skill. The final one is internal trauma, which deals bleeding damage. So again, if you're going for a really bleed heavy spec, then that could be quite good because, you know, bleed duration with a bit of range on it is pretty nice. Now the other ability here at level 1 is actually a passive ability which has a 5% chance to be used and deals extra weapon damage and reduces your enemy's defensive ability. Now defensive ability is what prevents you from being able to hit enemies or crit enemies, so reducing enemies' defensive ability by 50 at level 1 is actually quite a bit. Will allow you to get a lot more critical strikes out and be able to hit your enemies more in general. So it's a reasonably solid passive. So now moving to the second tier, we have pretty much all passives here. The first one is Military Condition, just physique and health, pretty much just a defensive buff. Okay in general. If you're stacking a lot of health integers, getting % increased health will make a big difference. Next up we have Will to Live. Now this one is a fantastic passive for the soldier. The way this works is when you get to 33% of your health, it will immediately proc and regenerate you. It'll apply a life regeneration and an instant heal as listed in the skill there. Now, the way that this works as you're leveling is you really only need to level this up to the health restored being 66% of your health. So basically, I have 2,000 health now. As long as about 1,200 to 1,500 health is about 66% of my health, it'll heal me all the way up to full when I drop to 33%. So that means, you know, as long as you're leveling this every now and then as you level, and as you increase your overall health pool, it'll fully heal you. And it has 16 levels. I think it will probably scale pretty well to endgame. Eventually the flat health restored might fall back a bit behind your health where it's not healing you up fully, but the extra life regen might kick in then and start to take effect. The next passive is Fighting Spirit, which has a 10% chance of activating when you are hit by enemies. It has a short duration which can be increased by leveling it up, and basically it gives you damage absorption, which 33% damage absorption is pretty good. It gives you increased offensive ability, which will allow you to crit and hit more, and 50% total extra damage, which can level up as well. So it's nice. If you're playing a tanky sort of build that's getting hit a lot, especially in melee, then this will proc fairly often. So 10%, you know, they only have to hit you 10 times for it to activate. So it's on average. So it's a fairly solid passive. Even with 1 point into it here, just the 33% damage absorption is fantastic. So that can be a 1 point and leave sort of passive, or you can level it up for extra damage if you want an extra duration, though I don't think that's completely necessary. So next up we have Overguard, which is a defensive skill. It is one that you activate here. It's on my 2 key. If I press it, it puts this around me, and basically it's a very shield synergy sort of skill. So it gives you reduced block recovery time, 100% reduced stun duration, which is actually pretty fantastic, and then 50% extra shield block. So when I have that activated, I go up to 83% shield block, which is obviously quite a bit of shield block. But in general, shields can't block everything, so this skill has limited defensive applications. Against a lot of melee enemies, it'll be really good, or general ranged enemies, but as spellcasters and things like that, not so helpful, especially against AoE damage. Blitz is a fantastic mobility skill. You may have seen me charge against an enemy with that. Basically you charge and do a shield barge, and it has pretty good length, and it increases your run speed as you're charging quite a bit. Now, two of the really good things about this is that it gives an AoE damage up to 3 targets, which is pretty nice, especially because in general the soldier has pretty limited AoE capabilities. And it also knocks down most targets for 1 to 3 seconds, which is essentially a stun. It knocks them back, knocks them down, makes them easy to kill. Especially, you know, if you're fighting a particularly hard single target that can be knocked down, then you can knock it down and finish it off. Now, Blade Arc is one that I didn't use too much while leveling, and that's because it seems to fight with cadence in terms of usability. I should actually go back for Blitz. Its passive bonus here is Blindside, which reduce defensive ability of your enemies and reduces their damage. So just a sort of a defensive bonus start there. So back to Blade Arc anyway. It's basically an AoE attack in front of you. Now I can actually activate that here for you guys to see. Basically it's sort of like a little force wave that you fling out from your sword. It seems so good. It seems pretty good. I've tested it out, but that said, it seems to really fight with cadence, and it does have an energy cost, so you can't use it as your main attack. The passive ability for that, Laceration, applies a fairly hefty bleed to even more targets. So targets around the ones that are struck will have bleed damage applied to them, which seems pretty powerful, again, if you're speccing into bleed. Zolhan's Technique is another passive that has a 5% chance, and that increases as you level, to use when you attack your opponents. Now what this does is it adds a small AoE to your attacks, so in addition to Cadence's occasional AoE, this can also provide a bit of AoE, and it slows your enemy's attack speed and increases your damage. Pretty general, pretty nice all round if you're going for a lot of main attacks. So if you're going for a Cadence sort of build, then that's a fantastic one to add into there. So next here we have Field Command, which is your kind of first aura. This will help out your party by applying attack speed and extra armor and extra defensive abilities. So it's a nice balanced aura, and it can also just work on you as well if you're playing solo. Its passive increase there increases everyone's damage, so obviously a nice little buff if you're already using this. Warcry is amazing. I am a big fan of Warcry. Basically you do it, it has a radius based on how far you've leveled it up, so it increases each time you level it up. And the big part of it is that it gives 20% reduced damage, and that increases as you level, and that is, a damage reduction before any other damage reduction. So if you reduce your enemy's damage that's incoming to you to 80%, then it can be reduced further. You're going to take a lot less damage in general. It also reduces your enemy's health by 33%, and that is regardless of how much health they have. So if you come up against a non-boss enemy, because it doesn't work against bosses, a non-boss enemy, or even a group of non-boss enemies that have a lot of health, you can reduce that instantly by 33%. Obviously, it's a really good one to open up with, but later on in the fight when enemies are low on health, it's not so helpful. The passive increase for that one is Break Morale, which reduces the enemy's resistances and disrupts their skills. The resistance one is nice for a bit of extra damage, but the disrupts target skills one is the real big one. I'm hoping this one works on bosses, but I haven't had a chance to try it out yet, and I don't think I'll be able to in the beta. So next up, we only really have a few left. The passive Scars of Battle is just reduced against status effects and armor absorption. Pretty just a general buff for defensive if you're going for a tanky sort of build. Nothing really too much to be said about that. Counter Strike is an ability that is activated, 10% chance of activating. So I believe it's a skill that you activate. It drains energy as it's activated, so 1 active energy cost per second. And enemies within 3 meters attacking you have a chance to be counter-struck for 10 weapon damage and 10% chance to stun. So I think the stun is the big part of that, but a bit of extra damage output is always nice. So here we have our 2 ultimate abilities. Menhir's Bulwark is a ultimate defensive ability, 300% health regeneration, damage absorption, crushing retaliation, so that's Thorn's damage basically, and stun retaliation, 15% chance of. Very, very good tanking ultimate ability there. Seems very solid. I'd be keen to try it one day. Next up we have Oleron's Rage, which is your more offensive ultimate ability. Now, I believe this one is kind of like a war cry. It seems to, it has a 15% duration, increases your damage, offensive ability, and total speed. So it's kind of just like go berserk mode. So anyway, hopefully that gives you guys a good idea of what you can expect with the soldier, and whether you'll be interested in playing them either in the alpha currently, the beta, or the full game when it releases. I assume some of these skills will be rebalanced and changed a little bit, but I think the overall shape of the skill tree will probably stay pretty similar. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.